Welcome everyone to this month's Open Analytics webinar. We've got a great topic today, really looking at a topical area, sort of AI risk management in financial services. So I'm James O'Donnell, the Managing Director of Open Analytics, and I'm joined by Dennis, who's a Senior Data Science in our team. Welcome, Dennis.
Hi, everyone.
Okay, so look, before we start, we've got a good crowd today. Just a few new faces. So I'll just spend maybe 30 seconds giving a little bit of background on Open Analytics. So Open Analytics, we're really a data science company that is specialized very specifically in credit risk. So we really work in three areas: credit data. So we help organizations structure their data for use in primarily automated credit processes and credit models. Credit risk modeling, very relevant to today's topic. So credit risk models for account management, capital management, provisioning, and that sort of thing. And then just credit risk management in general, so credit policies and credit process. So that's what we do. Just a quick sort of overview of the products and services that we have. So next slide there, Dennis. So just an overview of what we do. So we do a lot of hosted models, primarily for small to medium-sized lenders, where we host things like credit provisions and portfolio scoring. Credit rating services more for the private credit and some public credit funds, and then consulting for typically larger organizations where we build in-house scoring, capital, and other models. So contact details are in this presentation, which we'll send out to everyone. So don't hesitate to reach out anytime for a demo if you just want to chat. Okay, so without further ado, I'll hand over to Dennis to cover the presentation.
Great, thanks, James. So I'll jump straight in. So yeah, we're going to talk a lot about AI and how it's being used in Australia by financial services entities. And this is coming off the back of APRA released a letter to the industry based on some engagement that it did like sort of last year. And then it actually mentioned in particular this model Mythos that Anthropic released, Mythos. And it's actually quite interesting. So we're going to do a deep dive into that model based on some analysis that different organizations have done around the world on what the capabilities are and what it actually means specifically for cybersecurity risk. So just as in terms of an introduction, we know AI technology and tools are now being found everywhere. Everything has an AI button to summarize, to help you just sort of do your work a bit extra, and that's across coding platforms or Word or websites, Google. Everything has that in it. And then we also see the boards at all major organizations are really pushing the AI take up. And this has been happening for some time now, and it's very much top-down coming into organizations. At the same time, the AI technology companies, so whether it be OpenAI or Anthropic or what have you, they're all actually moving forward with these more advanced models, these LLMs with their reinforcement learning on top of that. So the question that APRA has asked, and they're just sort of trying to get to the bottom of, are Australian companies actually keeping up with the risks that are being introduced by all this AI that's coming into the industry? And what are the actual expectations? So they've actually released a letter, and we'll go through detail of what APRA expects and what they've listed out and what it really means for companies in Australia. And then we'll obviously jump into Mythos and what are the challenges which these sort of frontier models, cybersecurity threats that they might introduce, but at the same time, what are the opportunities that it's bringing along? Because it's not all negative. So jumping straight into that, APRA's observations, expectations for AI. Again, as I mentioned, that APRA did engage large banks, insurers, and super funds, so pretty much everyone that it regulates, for sort of questions and analysis on how AI is being used, and also what are the prudential risks that were being raised. So APRA cares about the stability of the financial system. So what they really want to know is what risks are raised across the whole financial system by all these new adoptions of AI. So I guess that the main things that it's calling out are that entities need to prioritize and strengthen the security defenses. And that it means, quickly implement patching of issues that they know, that close all the vulnerabilities they're aware of, and really focused attention to cyber hygiene. And then APRA actually mentioned and specifically named Anthropic Mythos as an example of this increase in capability of these LLMs and how they represent an increase in cyber threats. At the same time, APRA recognized that uplift in security actually can come through using these models to find these vulnerabilities, to fix the code as well. And I think the last thing is a bit of a warning where APRA is willing and has called out that it will be one, focusing on this stuff, but also is willing to take stronger supervisory action and can pursue enforcement. And it's actually ASIC also released some information to this as well. And actually, ASIC actually had a legal case that currently recently sort of closed and in its favor against an entity that didn't do enough on cybersecurity risk. So we'll also sort of touch on that. So in detail about the observations and expectations that APRA has raised, I sort of raised 4 key observations. So we'll start off with this one that, it's seen from its engagement that AI threats are increasing. Info security is actually not keeping up. So what AI is doing, it's allowing cyber attackers to use more attack pathways and more frequently. So it's really that automation that it's bringing in. And we list out all the common attack pathways that we've seen. And an interesting one with AI is this concept of prompt injection that's now made it in, where in text that you might provide to an AI agent, say, or just in a document, you can actually put in prompt injections to try and get illegal access essentially into an application. So it's very reminiscent to me of SQL injections that we used to protect back in the day. That in a form someone could put in a bit of SQL, and then you could from that actually run a SQL statement against the database. This is very similar to try and trick an AI agent or some sort of ALM to do some work for you or to access something you shouldn't. So what the expectations here are from APRA are that businesses really need to worry about operation resilience. Again, APRA worries about the stability of the financial system. So what happens if you're relying too much on AI for critical operations? Are you actually able to fall back to not use your AI services? Do you have those business continuity plans in place? And that's what it expects. Entities will have all this in place. Security controls are going to be established specifically to address these AI threats and attack paths, and that any of this AI-generated code, so AI is being used to build a lot of code these days, it's actually being put through security testing. That you're specifically making sure that you're not opening up yourself to cyber attacks by just implementing these the code generated by AI. And then lastly here, expectation under this observation is that entities worry or consider what's going on when they concentrate on just one AI provider, a third-party AI provider. So if there's an issue, obviously, with it, what does it mean for them to continue running their business? And they actually go into this in another observation as well, which we'll touch on again. So the second observation here is that AI adoption is moving fast, but governance is not, it's actually lagging. So AI, as was spoken, it's making its way into lots of different things, but within Australia, within banks and super providers, etc., AI is already being used quite widely for software engineering, fraud and scam disruption, all the way through customer interactions. So we're already way past companies just sort of tinkering or investigating how to use AI. It is making its way into those functions. But then on the other side, the governance of these AI things are not keeping up pace. So APRA found that entities do know that existing standards apply to AI, but they haven't updated the governance from what they had previously necessarily. So AI is different to APRA. APRA has called this out because it's a predictive model. So, I mean, and a lot of what they ask for, what APRA is going to expect out of AI models, is what we already know from credit risk modeling are important things. So things like you need to monitor your results. You need to worry about that your model continues to perform over time. But I guess in particular with AI, they're adaptive behavior models. So it's sort of even more important that you keep up with your monitoring and your change management as well. So that pretty much makes up what these expectations are across this. So that you have frameworks and reporting lines so you can use AI safely. That there's ownership of these AI models and services, across the whole life cycle through to decommissioning AI. You also have to remember to decommission AI and keep an inventory of your AI tools and your use cases, much like you would do for model risk. And then, obviously human involvement for high risk decisions and training AI, your staff on how to use AI safely. Now, there are also companies which provide services. There are, we actually partner with Yields, which provide services for specifically AI risk model governance, as well as regular model governance. So there are things that companies can do to help meet these expectations. Next observation we've got here is that AI expects, or has seen that there is some supplier risk management, but there are still challenges. There's still a little bit of way to go for entities in Australia to really appropriately manage supplier risk. And what this is about is the fact that there are these big international companies, US companies that are providing all these services, but perhaps contractual arrangements aren't actually keeping up with the risks that AI is introducing. So companies need to be able to have auditing rights, be aware of model updates and what are changes that the companies can make to models, and then whether there's incidents that the companies are notified of outages or any problems. So there's also dependencies that some AI services have on then fourth party providers, and companies should be aware of that sequence of different AI providers having dependencies on other AI providers. So that pretty much makes up what the expectations are on this topic, on this aspect. So APRA expects the entities map and maintain their full AI supply chain. That the contractual and governance arrangements which they have with their providers, that they have sufficient transparency, that they can audit the results and have assurance over these AI services. And that boards in particular that are pushing this change, they understand model behavior. So they have a deeper understanding than just what's being provided from that AI company. And at the same time, that concentration risk is managed carefully, so that if you have a systemic failure, that there is a way to exit the use of your AI service and roll back to something else. And then I think this might be the last one, that observation from APRA. It's that traditional change management is in place, but now it's not sufficient for the AI risks that are coming out. So we know AI risk cuts across all of the traditional risk domains, from operational risk through to privacy and information risk and conduct risk. And there are already change management structures in place for this, but it's not sufficient assurance. So, for example, there's a reliance on point in time and sample-based assurance methods. So they're not suited or well suited to probabilistic models. That's why, again, for credit risk modeling, we're aware that you have additional monitoring and governance, specifically because that these models may stop performing, that there is this predictive aspect to it. So what APRA has found is that there were few entities that actually had continuous validation or monitoring in place to detect the things that we know about from models, which is models have drift, there's bias, they fail sometimes, and there are control breakdowns. So you need all this for the AI models which you're applying as well. Because behind all that functionality, there is an LLM. It's still just a predictive model in place. And then lastly, that internal audit and risk functions are still lacking some of those new skills to engage in proper AI assessment. And again, the expectations reflect this observation. So entities are expected by APRA to have control frameworks in place to manage AI. That they apply assurance across all these aspects of risk that AI touches, cybersecurity and data governance, etc. And that the second-line risk management functions and internal audit functions have the right technical capability to actually assess these AI systems. And lastly, and this is a pretty important one in this observation and expectations, is that entities have assess any AI implementations for risk, for information security, not only at deployment, but throughout the life cycle. So they're continuously assessing what risk these AI services are introducing. Okay, so that's from APRA. That's based on the APRA letter. So a lot of good takeaways there. And then ASIC just earlier this month also released some advice on cyber threats. And it does very much reflect what APRA says. So we won't go through this in as much detail, although we've listed it here. But I guess the main point that ASIC does make is that entities, especially with these new models that are potentially a threat to cybersecurity, like Mythos, that entities need to act quickly. That it's actually they urgently need to step up and close off and the vulnerabilities and deal with these things. So they're urging entities not to delay, and this is important. They've reinforced the legal case that the entities need to manage their cyber risk. So they actually just recently had a successful case against FIIG Securities, where that company had to pay $3 million in total, roughly, because they failed to protect their clients from cybersecurity threats. So they actually had confidential personal data that was stolen, linked to the dark web. But I guess the reason why they were fined is because they didn't keep up, that their cybersecurity wasn't sufficiently in place. And this is important because it's actually the first time that the federal court imposed civil penalties for these sort of cybersecurity failures. So again, what it highlights is that there is a regulatory consequence of not maintaining your proper cybersecurity controls as a company in Australia with an AFSL. Cool. So that's what the regulators have told us recently. That's the expectations. And now we can sort of jump into a bit of detail about this new model that has also prompted a bit of action from the regulators. And that's Claude Mythos Preview, or we'll just refer to Mythos probably throughout the rest of the presentation. So just in April, Anthropic announced this new model. And then they announced that they won't release it publicly because it's too dangerous. Basically, what they said is that it can outperform humans at hacking and cybersecurity. It's particularly good at finding vulnerabilities. It did, however, release the model to around 50 entities, including some of the largest sort of tech companies in America, so like Microsoft, Google, and obviously in the world. So out of this, there's been sort of different levels of alarm and also skepticism from the industry and academics and governments. So you've got on one side like European banks and governments who are being playing it very safe, and they're actively consulting cybersecurity authorities on what are the risks and increasing all the AI risk testing, so closing off vulnerabilities quickly. We also have some academics that don't actually see that this model is that particularly significant. So they think that this is more of a PR stunt from Anthropic, trying to show this large leap in functionality. However, other academics aren't quite as skeptical. So they see that this is important, but it might not have super catastrophic consequences. And we'll go into sort of some of the testing, which we can sort of assess it ourselves as to how significant these models are. So Anthropic, they've released some of their testing themselves, and they show that this model actually scores a lot higher than previous cutting-edge model, their previous cutting-edge model on say a math Olympiad proof-based competition. And they've said that Mythos has found critical faults in every widely used operating system and web browser. So they've already done that testing with those companies, and they actually call out specific cases. Including, they've actually called out some cases where there's been vulnerabilities that have been in place for decades and haven't been found yet, but Mythos has found it now. So what we might focus on now is actually some analysis from the UK government's AI Security Institute, because it's an independent test away from Anthropic themselves. And they've put together these capture the flag challenges at different levels of complexity, and they've tested a battery of different AI models against them. So the point is that an AI model has to identify and exploit a weakness. That's what these tasks are about. So here we start with a chart showing the average success rate and sort of charted across time for different AI LLM models from different providers. There's also GPT models there. Now these are the easiest ones. So you start off with a technical, not expert level of model, which a lot of these models have performed very well since last year. And then we sort of scale it up to apprentice level, where Mythos has performed the best, but sort of previous models have also done well. But now we'll jump into sort of some of these harder models, that still capture the flag style challenges. And here's where you start seeing a bit more difference, where here, like actually expert is the hardest of these sort of models, and that's the black dots. And the average success rate of Mythos here was about 73%, outperforming all prior models. But however, other models do have success rate against these challenges. And maybe it's worth mentioning that this is using up to 50 million tokens. So obviously a lot of compute is going into this testing. But then what the AISI did is actually put together one more model, which is even a task, which is even more complex sort of corporate network attack simulation called The Last Ones, which is a great name. It's meant to take a human about 20 hours to complete this in terms of a hacking sort of task. And Mythos was the first model to be able to solve this from start to finish. So they've given us this chart, and it shows quite a few things. So one, it is showing the average steps completed, and then it also shows what's the best that a model did. So Mythos has 30% completion rate, so it was the first model that actually completed this across different simulations. And then the previous sort of, I guess, best performing model was Claude Opus 4.6, which got up to sort of 28 out of 32 steps of the task at its best, and had on average it completed sort of 14 steps compared to Mythos that on average would complete 22 steps. One thing that's different between these results and the results shown previously is that here we're actually charting against the compute being used, so how many tokens were used. So that vertical line sort of shows you how far the models could get using 10 million tokens. So Mythos did perform well, but within 10 million tokens, it only got up to 14 steps at its best performance. And then it actually takes like 100, actually before 100 million tokens, it can already sort of complete the task. Whereas I think it took Claude Opus, those 100 million tokens to actually get up to 28 out of 32 of the tasks. So yeah, it does perform better on this test, and sort of significantly so. So how does AISI sort of summarize this analysis? It says that, yeah, from 2 years ago, models are getting much better at completing these cybersecurity tasks, and Mythos has done better and to complete them. But at the same time, there are important differences between what they've tested and the real world, in that there's no active defenders. There's no penalties for the model sort of triggering security and defensive strategies being put in place. So Mythos hasn't been shown to be able to do all this stuff on its own and attack really well-defended systems. But I guess what it is showing is that if you have a weak security posture, you can potentially use these models, something like Mythos, to exploit vulnerabilities. That it can do that. And what AISI is trying to highlight is, again, stick to the basics. Close all your security gaps. Apply your vulnerability closure. Everything that you know is open. Patch up all your problems, and have continuous logging on place as well. Now, the Australian Signals Directorate has also done a bit of analysis, and we'll touch on that quickly. And it relied a lot on the AISI analysis, but it sort of points out some different things. And one point was that with these advanced models, the more compute that you gave it, the further along they got. So obviously Mythos was able to finish the testing, but then the prior model from Claude, it kept getting better up to 100 million tokens. So the capability of using these models for attacking is a function of how much compute and time you have. So what does this mean is that if you're defending against these models being used, is that as soon as you identify an issue, you should work to reduce your exposure, respond as quickly as possible, and apply your defensive strategies. So a couple of interesting things. It found that, like, it calls out that Mozilla, for Firefox, Mythos was able to identify close to around 270 vulnerabilities. But then again, they could be fixed in a single Firefox release. So yes, it can find lots more vulnerabilities than before, but it's actually not finding new cases of vulnerabilities. It's just finding them quicker. So it's not, again, it's an LLM. It's trained on prior knowledge. So it's able to apply those to this software, but it's not thinking and finding brand new vulnerabilities. So I think that's an important difference of what we might think that it can do. And sort of worryingly, what's happening now is that some of these techniques to find vulnerabilities that Mythos has used can be reproduced using inexpensive open weight models. So these are pre-trained models that are available to the public. So initially it was thought, okay, Mythos is a step change. It's not being released. So as a defender, you've got time to work on your security, to assess it, to get in the right place for defending against these sort of models. But that assumption is no longer true, because you can actually replicate this with publicly open models. And then just closing off what ASD said was that, prevention is very important, but they also recommended you have to prepare for the breach. So make sure that if an attacker gets in, they can't laterally move around your system, and that you've got a good response plan in place, so you know what to do when there is a breach, because obviously this risk is higher now. Okay, so I'll just quickly summarize. Entities should prioritize AI risk governance. That's across the board what everyone's saying. Looking at how AI is integrated into business processes, but also what's the reliance on third-party providers, and APRA is making a strong case for that. As we mentioned, ASD has talked about preventative measures and security breach response planning. And that recent technical advances really strengthen the case that ASIC is making that urgent action is needed. The scale and speed of potential attacks has increased. And lastly, that the regulators have both called out that inaction or ineffective controls put a company or an entity at risk of that supervisory reaction or enforcement by regulators. Great. So that's a quick run through a lot of material. There's a lot of information here about both Mythos, and there's so much in the news about this stuff, and changes are happening all the time. So I just read that OpenAI has released its version of a model. So GPT 5.5 Cyber, which can also do the same things that Mythos can. And we've got some of Australia's bigger banks and entities that actually got access to that model. So there is movement in Australia, and I think the Australian government is in talk with Anthropic, so we can also get access to Mythos. So like a lot of news coming up on these issues.
Great, thanks very much, Dennis. Very interesting, and maybe a little bit scary as well. I failed to mention at the start, although we put in the text, and feel free to shoot through any questions. We've got one so far, and in the last minute we've got left. Question is, how is Open Analytics using AI in its day-to-day, and how are you managing these risks? So probably a long answer to that. You could separate that into external threats, a lot of what Dennis was talking about. So answers to that, we'd probably have to get our IT people. We're doing the normal things around sort of penetration testing and that sort of thing. But internally, how are we using AI? I would say we're kind of using it really fairly exclusively in the coding space. So we're actually using Claude. So really one of the lower tiers actually Claude Code, and we actually find that quite useful for various internal tasks. So I'd say we're not sort of going down the path of sort of the agentic AI and sort of giving AI agents access. I mean, given what we do, we're actually quite constrained on that. So we're probably described as fairly constrained use of AI just in coding. All right, so thanks for that question. I think we'll wrap it up there. We're right on time. So as I mentioned, we'll send out this presentation to everyone who attended and also registered. Okay, so thanks everyone and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.